The September morning arrived with unusual stillness over London. The city that never seemed to pause held its breath as news spread through social media, television broadcasts, and whispered conversations in coffee shops. At Kensington Palace, Prince William stood by the window of his private study, his hands clasped behind his back. The weight of what lay ahead pressed upon his shoulders, not as a burden of duty, but as something far more personal. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, entered the room quietly. She had been awake since dawn, preparing not for a state occasion or royal engagement, but for something that would touch the nation's heart in ways no speech or ceremony could. Her hair was pulled back simply, and she wore a plain black dress. No jewels adorned her neck. No royal regalia marked her status. Today was not about being a princess. Today was about being human. The decision had been made 3 days earlier. William had received a letter from a mother in Manchester whose 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, had lost her battle with a rare form of childhood cancer. The letter wasn't asking for money or publicity. The mother, Emma Thompson, had simply wanted to share her daughter's story with someone she thought might understand the weight of public grief. Sophie had been a devoted follower of the royal family, keeping a scrapbook of newspaper clippings about William and Kate's charitable work with children. William had read the letter aloud to Catherine that evening. As he reached the part where Emma described her daughter's final days, his voice had broken. Catherine had taken the letter from his trembling hands and finished reading it herself. Sophie had asked her mother to send her favorite teddy bear to the prince and princess after she was gone, hoping they might give it to another sick child who needed comfort. The teddy bear had arrived the next day, worn and well-loved, with a small note attached in a child's careful handwriting. Please help other children be brave like me. Love, Sophie. That evening, William and Catherine had made their decision. They would attend Sophie's funeral, not as representatives of the crown, but as parents who understood that some losses transcend protocol. They would go without fanfare, without announcing their presence to the media, without the usual security detail that turned every royal appearance into a spectacle. The palace communications team had been stunned when informed of the plan. Royal protocol dictated careful orchestration of public appearances, especially those involving such sensitive matters. But William had been firm. This wasn't about royal duty or public relations. This was about honoring a little girl's memory and supporting a grieving family. As their car wound through the streets of Manchester, Catherine held Sophie's teddy bear in her lap. She had spent the previous evening learning everything she could about the little girl. Sophie had loved butterflies, believing they were messages from heaven. She had been learning to play the violin, practicing even on days when the chemotherapy left her too weak to stand. She had written stories about princesses who saved kingdoms not through magic, but through kindness. The church was small, built of weathered stone that had witnessed centuries of joy and sorrow. William and Catherine arrived 30 minutes before the service, entering through a side door. They had asked Emma if they could come early, to pay their respects privately before the other mourners arrived. Emma Thompson stood alone in the church, her hand resting on the small white coffin adorned with butterfly stickers and children's drawings. When she turned and saw William and Catherine, her composure crumbled. Catherine moved forward without hesitation, embracing the grieving mother as she would a friend. No words were exchanged. None were needed. William placed his hand on the coffin, his wedding ring catching the colored light from the stained glass windows. He thought of his own children, safe and healthy at home, and felt the sharp edge of a parent's worst fear. Catherine gently placed Sophie's teddy bear inside the coffin, nestled beside the little girl. Emma's sob echoed in the quiet church. For 20 minutes, they sat together in the front pew. Emma shared stories of Sophie's courage, her humor, her determination to make every day count. She showed them videos on her phone of Sophie dancing in her hospital room, bald from chemotherapy but grinning widely. She shared the last drawing Sophie had made, a picture of her family surrounded by butterflies and rainbows. As other mourners began to arrive, William and Catherine prepared to slip out quietly. But Emma asked them to stay. "Sophie would have wanted you here," she said simply. She believed in fairy tales, but more than that, she believed in people being kind to each other. You being here, it would have meant everything to her. So they stayed, sitting in the third row, without announcement or acknowledgement. The small church filled with Sophie's classmates, teachers, nurses from the hospital, and family members. Many did double takes when they recognized the royal couple, but something about their quiet presence, their lack of entourage or ceremony, kept the focus where it belonged, on Sophie. The service was beautiful in its simplicity. Children from Sophie's class sang "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," their young voices wavering but determined. Her violin teacher played the piece Sophie had been learning, a simple melody that seemed to carry all the hope and dreams of a life cut too short. Emma spoke about her daughter with a strength that seemed impossible, sharing funny stories that had the congregation laughing through their tears. When it came time for the eulogy, the minister spoke about butterflies and transformation, about how Sophie had touched more lives in 8 years than many do in 80. He mentioned the many children at the hospital who had been inspired by Sophie's bravery, the fundraising she had initiated even while undergoing treatment, the letters she had written to other sick children. Catherine wept openly, making no effort to maintain royal composure. William's jaw was tight with the effort of controlling his emotions, but tears rolled down his cheeks as the small coffin was carried out by Sophie's uncles and older cousins. The congregation followed, walking to the cemetery adjacent to the church. At the graveside, something extraordinary happened. As the minister spoke the final prayers, a cloud of butterflies appeared, dancing over the assembled mourners. Later, people would say it was a coincidence that the unusual warm weather had brought them out. But in that moment, everyone present felt it was Sophie's final message. After the burial, as mourners gathered for tea in the church hall, William and Catherine mingled quietly with the other guests. They spoke with Sophie's teachers, who shared stories of her determination to keep up with her studies even during treatment. They comforted Sophie's best friend, Lucy, who clutched a friendship bracelet Sophie had made for her. They listened to the nurses who had cared for Sophie, learning about the little girl who had nicknamed each of her chemotherapy drugs after Disney villains she was defeating. One of Sophie's classmates, a shy boy named Marcus, approached Catherine hesitantly. He held out a folded piece of paper. "Sophie wrote this for you," he said quietly. "She gave it to me before she went to the hospital the last time. She said if she couldn't deliver it herself, I should." Catherine's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. In careful, child's handwriting, Sophie had written, "Dear Princess Catherine, I hope you get this letter. I wanted to tell you that being a princess isn't about crowns or castles. It's about making people feel special when they're sad. You do that. Thank you for showing me what a real princess is like. Love, Sophie. P.S. Please hug your children extra tight tonight." Catherine broke down completely, and William pulled her close. The other mourners respectfully gave them space, understanding that grief is a great equalizer. In that moment, they weren't royalty. They were simply two parents imagining the unimaginable, two human beings moved by the courage of a child. As they prepared to leave, Emma Thompson approached them one final time. She pressed something into William's hand, a small butterfly pin that Sophie had worn during her treatments. She called it her brave butterfly, Emma explained. "I want you to have it. Maybe you could give it to another child who needs to be brave." William nodded, unable to speak. Catherine hugged Emma again, whispering something in her ear that made the grieving mother smile through her tears. Then, as quietly as they had arrived, William and Catherine left. The drive back to London was silent for the first hour. Finally, Catherine spoke. "We have to do more," she said. "Not grand gestures or royal initiatives, but this being present, being human." Sophie understood something we sometimes forget in all the protocol and ceremony. William reached over and took her hand. "She did," he agreed. An 8-year-old girl understood what really matters. That evening, their own children noticed something different about their parents. Prince George asked why Mummy's eyes were red, and Charlotte wanted to know why Daddy hugged them so many extra times before bed. Little Louis simply enjoyed the extra stories and cuddles. William and Catherine didn't explain where they had been, but they held their children a little tighter, read one more story, sang one more lullaby. Later, as they sat in their private sitting room, Catherine carefully placed Sophie's butterfly pin in a special box. "We'll know when it's time to pass it on," she said. William nodded, understanding that Sophie's legacy would continue in ways the little girl could never have imagined. The news of their attendance at the funeral didn't break immediately. The other mourners, out of respect for the family and perhaps understanding the significance of the gesture, didn't rush to social media or call the press. But over the following days, the story emerged quietly. A local newspaper ran a small item, noting only that the Prince and Princess of Wales had privately attended the funeral of a young cancer victim. They didn't sensationalize it or publish photos. But the story spread, as these things do, through word of mouth and social media. People shared not dramatic headlines or exclusive photos, but quiet testimonies. The teacher who had seen Catherine comforting Sophie's classmates. The nurse who had watched William listening intently to stories about Sophie's bravery. The mourners who had witnessed two members of the royal family setting aside all protocol to simply be present in a moment of profound loss. Emma Thompson, when approached by media outlets offering substantial sums for her story, declined everyone. She issued only one statement: "The prince and princess honored my daughter's memory in the way Sophie would have wanted, with quiet kindness and genuine compassion. That is her story, and that is their story. Nothing more needs to be said." But across the nation, much was being said. In hospitals, nurses shared the story with young patients, telling them about Sophie's bravery and how even princes and princesses had been moved by her courage. In schools, teachers used it as an example of how true leadership sometimes means setting aside position and protocol to simply be human. In homes, parents hugged their children a little tighter, reminded of how precious and fragile life could be. The palace, meanwhile, received thousands of letters. Many were addressed to William and Catherine, expressing gratitude for their gesture. But many more were about Sophie, parents sharing stories of their own children's battles, teachers writing about students who had been inspired by Sophie's story, children sending drawings of butterflies. A movement began, quiet but persistent, with people performing acts of kindness in Sophie's memory, always marked with a butterfly symbol. William and Catherine read many of these letters personally. Each one reinforced their understanding that their unannounced, unheralded presence at a little girl's funeral had touched something deep in the national consciousness. It wasn't about celebrity or royal glamour. It was about the recognition that grief and love, loss and hope transcend all boundaries of class or position. In the weeks that followed, they noticed butterflies everywhere, in drawings sent by children, in pins worn by nurses at hospitals they visited, in garden plantings at schools. Sophie's symbol of transformation had become something larger, a reminder that small acts of courage and kindness could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. The teddy bear Sophie had sent them became a quiet tradition. William and Catherine began bringing it, carefully cleaned and mended, to children facing long hospital stays. They never made announcements about it, never sought publicity. They would simply arrive, often with little warning, and spend time with young patients. The bear, which became known among hospital staff as Sophie's bear, seemed to carry with it a special kind of comfort. One evening, 3 months after the funeral, Catherine was putting Charlotte to bed when her daughter asked, "Mummy, why were you and Daddy so sad that day?" Catherine had been waiting for this question. She sat on the edge of Charlotte's bed and explained, in simple terms, about Sophie, a brave little girl who had been very sick, but who had spent her time thinking about how to help others. "Did you know her?" Charlotte asked. "No, darling," Catherine replied. "But sometimes you don't need to know someone to be moved by their story. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to show up for people when they're sad, even if you don't know them well." Charlotte thought about this. Like when I share my snack with the new girl at school when she forgot her lunch? Exactly like that, Catherine said, smoothing her daughter's hair. Sophie understood that being kind was the most important thing, even when things were hard for her. "Will I get to meet her?" Charlotte asked sleepily. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "No, sweetheart. Sophie isn't here anymore. But her kindness is still here in all the people who remember her and try to be kind like she was." As Charlotte drifted off to sleep, Catherine reflected on how a little girl they had never met in life had changed their perspective so profoundly. The royal duties continued, of course, the state dinners, the official visits, the carefully orchestrated public appearances. But now, interwoven with all of that was something different, an understanding that their most powerful moments might not be in grand palaces or at state occasions, but in small churches at hospital bedsides, in the quiet moments of shared humanity. William found himself wearing Sophie's butterfly pin on the inside of his jacket during difficult engagements. Visits to children's hospices, meetings with bereaved families, occasions that required him to offer comfort in the face of loss. It reminded him that an 8-year-old girl had faced the ultimate fear with grace and concern for others. How could he do any less? The impact extended beyond William and Catherine. Other members of the royal family, inspired by the story, began making their own quiet, unannounced visits to families in crisis. The palace staff noticed a shift in how royal engagements were planned, with more emphasis on genuine connection and less on protocol and pageantry when visiting those in distress. But perhaps the most profound impact was on the thousands of ordinary people who heard the story and were moved to act. Teachers who spent extra time with struggling students. Nurses who sat an extra few minutes with frightened children. Parents who took the time to really listen to their children's fears and dreams. All inspired by a little girl named Sophie and the reminder that kindness doesn't require a crown.